This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook. Chapter 43, Welcome to the Neighborhood. My mother was on a mission. At some point in the mid-60s, the cane toad, or Bufo marinus, exploded onto the South Florida suburban scene. Termed a giant neotropical toad, a legion showed up in a hurry, with explosive force, like someone had just flipped a switch. So immediate was their arrival. It seemed like one day they were everywhere, when there had been not a single toad the day before. South Florida in the 1960s seemed to have more than its share of plant and pest invasions, more so than any other region of the country. I have not studied this phenomenon, but have pondered it a bit. There appear to be a couple of factors behind these trends. First, the mix of cultures and races in South Florida mushroomed after the 1950s. We went from some early settlers and a few snowbirds from New York, New Jersey, and the Midwest to a wide-ranging mix of folks from numerous Caribbean islands, South and Central America. Even the African continent participated. Trade opened up and all sorts of new products steamed in from ports afar. With this influx of varied peoples and their possessions came other small passengers in the form of plants, animals, and insects. It was all about diversity and cultural trappings, blended together all at once. Second, when it comes to plant, animal, and insect infestations, it is always about predators. If one introduces a living thing to a new place and does not at the same time introduce its natural predator, a new predator must step up, or a biological imbalance results. One has removed a piece of the mobile of living things, and it gets wonky very fast. Whatever natural predators kept the Bufo marinus in check at their point of origin did not join them on their journey to South Florida. Bufo had a free rein and were quickly overrunning the place. That is, until the crew and I showed up. Unlike a tropical tree frog, Bufo marinus did not climb. They were not shiny and moist like frogs, nor were they cute. They hopped around clumsily and even crawled sometimes across the ground. Their skin was bumpy and rough, clammy to the touch, not unlike that of an alligator or iguana, but softer. And sometimes they could grow positively huge in size, easily equal to a pair of size 10 PF Flyers. It is believed that the Bufo was introduced to South Florida in the late 1950s, somehow brought up from the Caribbean islands, South or Central America, or perhaps all three. The cane toad moniker comes from their desire to voraciously consume any kind of beetle or other insect that in turn eats sugarcane. It is even possible that the growers in the Belglade region of Florida, near Lake Okeechobee, deposited a seeding group of Bufos purposely to help in the cane field pest control efforts. Given their masterful reproductive skills, the population exploded. Bufos, as my mother endearingly called them, had unusual diets. Given our uniform avoidance of anything to do with hard science, especially biology, all we knew was that they ate insects. We might have studied more. Most active at night, Bufo would rove around seeking out small living creatures of any kind, and dead ones as well. Incredibly, they also ate garbage. Disgusting as they were, the real menace of the Bufo, and the reason for my mother's passion for total and complete annihilation, was their toxicity. Bufo marinus were deadly. When molested by a young boy or dog, two large puffy glands behind their eyes and the sides of their heads would exude what looked to us like Elmer's glue. Far from it. This sticky white substance wasn't glue at all, but an extremely toxic and deadly poison. They had one other defense we located in our effort to engage the scourge. If one held the Bufo up by the scruff, if it could be called that, not only would the glands puff out the white poison, but the pissed-off toad pissed up a storm. More than once, this interesting bufo bodily function was used to attack a crew member with the most vile results. We were a bunch of young boys, after all. The local media had sent out the alert more than once to keep pets away from bufo, or they could come to a rapid and painful expiration. Before South Floridians knew what was going on, more than a few dogs had taken up a bufo in their jaws, choked, convulsed, and died in a horrific display. It was open season on the pests, and my mother was the general in charge. She gave us all carte blanche, with the assurance that no method of extermination would be off limits. Lobster went to work immediately and, in his own secretive way, quickly found an effective solution. He found that the bufo was far more active at night. We guessed it was something to do with better access to food, fewer predators, the family dog, or more agreeable female toads. After all, when bufo was not eating, we noticed a lot of double-decker configurations in the front yard. Lobster discovered that if a high-beam flashlight was shined into the eyes of a bufo, it paralyzed the critter. Holding the flashlight on the frozen target, one could then draw down on it with a high-powered pellet gun, and one very prolific, poisonous pest would quickly be eliminated. Soon, Lobster innovated further by taping the flashlight to the underside of his rifle barrel. Because the bufo was such a klutz, and really no match for the speed of a young boy, we could also just hit them with a high-powered beam and gig 'em, depositing the heavy corpses in a bucket for later disposal. Please try to appreciate the magnitude of this South American invasion. At any moment after dark, if one scanned the front yard, at least 10 sets of reflective eyes would shine back. Even following a sweep, the next night would be no different. At times, we wondered what would happen if our SWAT team was disbanded. At the rate the bufo was procreating, we'd be 2 feet deep in poisonous cane toads within a month. As with our cockroach infestation, which ended in disaster, envisioning such a grotesque overpopulation of such equally offensive pests was more than the General could bear. This was a serious and vital campaign, and Mom urged us to approach it as such. A few nights a week, she would rally the troops. We'd gear up and head out. Sometimes Dink or Dork would join us, and occasionally Monkey too. It was dirty work, and not everyone had the stomach or the weaponry. One evening, Butler showed up. He wasn't usually part of the sweeping unit, but this night he casually strolled into the front yard. It appeared he had a plan. We had new neighbors at the end of our street, right across from Ted Williams's house. Just about the first thing the new arrivals did when they moved in was begin a major landscaping project. The centerpiece was a group of planting islands that framed the front corner of their yard. Almost complete, pure white sand mounds had been built. Their shapes undulated in height, width, and direction like large, thick albino snakes. All they needed were the shrubs. We had swept through 3 yards by the time Butler showed up and had collected a couple of buckets of bufo corpses. He asked me what we were going to do with the deceased. I replied the usual, that they would be dumped in our heavy, anodized steel garbage cans at the side of the garage. This was not ideal. With the heat and humidity of South Florida, anything dead began an ugly decomposition almost immediately. Often bufo was run over by cars. Within 24 hours, the stench was gut-wrenching. Sometimes, approaching a ripening carcass on our bikes, we'd turn right around and head straight back the way we'd come. Butler mumbled that he had a better idea for the evening's catch. Heavy buckets in hand, we followed him down the dark street. The plan was laid out. It was repugnant and absurd, but very creative, so we went to work quietly and with glee and determination. Within an hour, we were finished. The biggest challenge had been keeping an eye out as we worked and ducking the occasional car that illuminated the area as it rolled down the street. Early Sunday morning, I hopped out of bed. I threw on a t-shirt and shorts and raced barefoot up the street to Junkle's house. He had not been part of the previous night's mission, but his side yard abutted the new neighbor's house. We could stand in a breezeway to his garage behind some banana palms and peer out to observe the neighbor's yard while being obscured from view. We had done this before. It was an ideal lookout. Following my briefing, Jungle could hardly contain himself and kept jabbering. I had to punch him hard in the arm more than once to shut him up, lest we'd be given away. As expected, the Sunday morning ritual began right on cue. The new neighbor walked out to collect the 4-pound Miami Herald, Sunday edition. Robed lightly against the balmy morning breezes, she strolled down her driveway, bent over and grabbed a large, rubber-banded bundle of newspaper. As she straightened up and began to turn back, she glanced with a smile over toward the new landscaping project. Then she froze. With a scream and a gag, she dropped the paper and sprinted up the driveway and into the house. Jungle and I looked at one another, sporting wide grins. In moments, her husband was leading the way as the couple and their 2 young kids, all clad in pajamas, scurried out to the newly landscaped islands. They were aghast. Greeting them that bright and sunny Sunday morning were at least 60 dead and very fragrant Bufo marinus. Flies buzzed thickly in the air. There were not just a couple piles of corpses haphazardly dumped in the sand. That would be an act without imagination. No, this collection was actively engaged posthumously and with advanced rigor mortis and a delightful variety of acts. Using twigs found in the yard cleanup pile the landscapers had left behind, we had propped up the deceased toads in various positions and formations, both alone and in groups. Some were doing toad cartwheels. Others were lounging with toad legs stretched out and tiny toad arms crossed behind their heads, as if tanning on a sunny Miami beach. 3 were making snow angels in the white sand. 4 more were chasing one another in a line across one of the many sand dunes. A line of 6 were no more than 12 toad feet sticking up out of the sand. Next to them were 6 toad heads doing the same. Were they the same toads? Well, pull on a stiff foot and find out. Of course, we had to have a few couples engaged in intense rapture. After all, when not eating or crawling around, we calculated that's pretty much what the Bufo did. It went on and on. The poor new neighbors were shell-shocked. This was not the kind of welcome they had envisioned. They paced back and forth, holding their noses, while the kids stood frozen, with no idea what to make of it all. Where did all these toads come from? Why were they all so stiff? Of course, the real questions begging answers were, what in the hell do we do with this disgusting mess? And who are these people we must now socialize with as our neighbors? They stood in anger and disbelief for a few minutes, eyes glaring up and down the streets of their new neighborhood in search of answers. The initial moment of surprise had passed, so for Jungle and I, the thrill and interest quickly waned. The job was complete, and the results were in. Crouched low, we crept inside. His mom was just pulling some French toast and sausages off the griddle. We had a feast. Finally, my encyclopedia was put to good use. Up next is Chapter 44, and it's called Atlas, My Savior.